You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob, it's bully in the
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Village, alongside Michael Friscolanti, Frisco, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Another great show coming up this week. We'll get to that in a sec. But Frisco, I'll tell you, the love that we've been feeling over the last week since we debuted has been amazing.
Yes, my mother certainly liked the podcast.
And thankfully, it was more than just Mom that subscribed and downloaded. But in all seriousness, the positive feedback and the encouragement that we've been receiving from not only around the province of Ontario, but actually from around North America has been a little bit overwhelming. So thanks to everybody for doing that. Great show coming up, but as always, the first word to Frisco, and I want to talk very briefly about an interesting story coming out of Aurelia that has to do with some controversy over patio season.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we got to remember that this podcast, the goal here is to try to show people, remind people of the great local journalism we're doing across our markets. You know, and I read our sites every day, and I'm just amazed by the work we're doing. And, you know, there's a great story going on in Aurelia right now. If you live there, you know that the See You on the Patio program is a pretty big issue. They launched this during COVID, where they shut down a main street on the weekends to let restaurants and bars put patios, put tables out on the street, basically. And people loved it. It allowed people to go to the stores. People who were nervous during COVID to be shopping inside, and dining inside wasn't allowed, obviously. This summer, they've decided to really scale it back, and it has caused just a flurry of emotion and anger from people. People just have really strong opinions about this. I know that our journalists there have been covering it really closely, and I think it's one of those issues we got to talk about next week, I think, on the podcast a little more deeply, because it's just a great local story. A lot of attention, and it really just shows how valuable it is to have the local journalist and the local website we have there covering it. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. We will follow that one closely. It sounds like an interesting story is brewing for sure. The first word from Frisco. Coming up in our first segment, we'll be joined by Tim Hudak, the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. Seems everybody these days, Frisco, is talking about what is going on in the housing market.
It seems some days like it's the only thing people are talking about, so I'm anxious to hear from you.
All right, Tim Hudak, next on Inside the Village.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village. Frisco, this is a segment I've been excited about for some time. Any street corner, any coffee shop in any town, Ontario, people are talking about one thing and one thing only, and that's the housing market.
It truly is. I mean, prices continue to skyrocket in all markets, and it is something that everyone's talking about. And as we know, it's an issue that's become very political lately, too. The federal budget had a lot in there about affordable housing and how to fix it, how to make more affordable housing available to people. The Ford government has announced a whole bunch of new things lately to try to cool the market. And the real question is, are any of these things going to work? Do politicians have the ability to do this, to help people get affordable housing? It's an important question.
Well, and let's ask that question and maybe a few others to a gentleman that has some answers. Tim Hudak, the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, joins us on Inside the Village. Tim, appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
It's great to be welcomed inside the village. Heard a lot about it. It's nice to be on the inside, and a nice village it is.
Thanks, Tim.
It certainly is. Tim, can you start by telling everybody about the Ontario Real Estate Association and maybe what the mission is?
For sure. So the Ontario Real Estate Association represents Ontario's now 93,000 realtors who are active in every big city, small town, village, northern or southern Ontario community. And our goal is to help create that next generation of Ontario homeowners. Each and every day, our members are out there busting their backs, trying to help people who have done everything right. They've played by the rules, worked hard, saved up every penny, but they can't get in the housing market. We want to help get those keys closer to hand for more Ontario families.
That's a great point, Tim. And that's really the heart of the conversation, I think, is that slipping away for more and more families, that we keep seeing this. We keep seeing so many numbers on the news, how skyrocketing prices are, from Aurelia to Cambridge to Sault Ste. Marie. Let's just maybe start with the basics. Why are housing prices skyrocketing? I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Well, it's a basic game of economics. We've got incredible demand, and I can walk through the reasons behind that demand. They're all good problems to have, but we didn't create enough housing supply to keep up with all the new home buyers in the marketplace. It's hard to believe, but we actually built fewer homes over the last couple of decades than we did in the 1970s, for goodness sakes. With more immigration now, millennials coming into the marketplace, getting raises, raising families, and we have less housing supply. So it's almost like a cruel game of musical chairs, where you have more people circling fewer and fewer homes, and therefore the prices are going up. And that's not just a Toronto issue. That's Sault Ste. Marie, that's Guelph, that's Thunder Bay, Ottawa, down to Windsor. It is right across our great province. And the first part of your question, sadly it slipped. There has been an incredible story about Canada that since Confederation, right through 2016, the number and rate of homeownership increased. Through the wars, through the 70s, 80s, every generation had a better shot at owning their own place than the parents or grandparents. Until 2016, where it started going sideways. We want to turn that around.
Tim, if we can talk about some specific stats for a second, and please correct me if I'm wrong on any of these. The average price of a home in Ontario is more than $1 million and counting, a massive jump from even just the start of the pandemic. And to your point, you see it in Sault Ste. Marie, Guelph, Orillia, all over the place. I know you've got kids, Frisco's got kids, I've got kids. If they want to buy a home, is it going to be possible for them to do that?
It's harder, but I'm optimistic, and let me give you a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it is a smart investment. It is a proven investment that pays off over the years, time and time again. And people also like homeownership because it's our most precious asset for our memories. It's where we raise our family. It's where we feel most secure, most comfortable, most ourselves. And besides, you can't live in a stock and a bond, right? So I do believe there is a strong belief in that great Canadian value of home ownership. The reason I feel that we can actually get that dream back within reach of hardworking, middle-class Ontarians, there was some light at the end of the tunnel. We brought some ideas forward to the current provincial government to increase housing supply and choice, particularly for first-time home buyers and move-up buyers when the kids come along. And they listened to some of our ideas, and we actually had more homes built last year than the last 30 years. Over 100,000 new homes built. Okay, so that's helpful. We need to get to 150. So I remain optimistic that while times are a bit challenging now for prospective home buyers, I do see help on the way.
I think those are all great points, Tim. I think what happens is people focus on those viral stories they see, right? I mean, there's one that came out of Guelph this week. There was a house listed, and if you look at the photos, it looked like it was a crime scene in there, just a total dilapidated place. It was listed for $643,000. It had 32 offers and sold for $117,000 over the asking price. Wow. We just looked at the photos a couple minutes ago, and it's just wild. I mean, this is the bottom the question again. But when young people see that, how can they feel like they ever have a chance of getting into this market?
I totally get it. I mean, I wasn't after that house. You know what? My wife Debbie and I were, like many of your viewers and listeners, we would put an offer in and we think about the house. We talk about where the crib's going to go, kids playing in the backyard, and then you end up on the losing end. A week or two later, you do the same thing and end up losing again. Like, I totally get that buyer frustration. And we do have an opportunity now because the provincial election campaign is coming up. And I have no doubt that if you're in, Simcoe or the Sioux or in Niagara, where I'm from, homeownership and housing costs are going to be a top 3 issue. Mm-hmm. So I encourage folks that are part of this, watching on The Village, should go out and talk to their candidates of all political parties. Say, what are you going to do to help my son or daughter or me and my wife, right, have a chance to own a home that we can afford?
That's a great point. And I want to ask you, we're going to get into some specifics about that, but what is the answer? I mean, what's the right answer for a politician right now? Because that is going to be a huge issue in the elections coming up. What's the best answer, Tim? What's the best way we can provide more affordable housing to people in Ontario?
It is supply. It is getting more homes built that are affordable and the places where we need them. And the second thing, I'd love to see more assistance for first-time home buyers. Mm-hmm. As you gentlemen know, that once you get your foot on the first rung of the ladder and you own a home, it's easier to move up. The toughest part is getting into the market in the first place. We currently do have a rebate on the land transfer tax in Ontario for first-time buyers up to a certain level. I'd like to see that across land transfer tax, or perhaps some kind of program that helps them with the crucial down payment, because as you know, it's more the down payment than the mortgage that's a challenge these days, and then let people pay that back over time. I think that gives a leg up, particularly if you don't come from a wealthy family and you're trying to get in the market. That kind of government assistance would help. The biggest effort from government needs to be on creating more housing. And here's some ideas. The government should, in its urban areas, intensify, particularly where there is transit. As we go to a work from home economy, there's going to be excess space in old government buildings, and even some commercial will be downsizing. So how about if we help to convert that to residential or mixed use? Buildings are already there. They're up. For northern and smaller communities, give the municipalities more flexibility to develop land that is not environmentally sensitive, that can put new affordable homes on that space. We don't have to treat every municipality like it's Toronto, so give those communities a chance to create some new homes. And we really like to see an emphasis on first-time buyer homes, the move-up buyer homes I mentioned when the kids grow up and need a bit more space. And also, you know, for my parents' generation, when my parents wanted to sell the family home, they didn't for a while because they couldn't find a place where they could move into that was a smaller place and free up the family home. We need more in that area as well.
Tim, we tend to go through these types of cycles and peaks and valleys, and I know that you don't have a crystal ball and would probably love to have one. But when do you see the market correcting itself?
Well, we did get a magic 8-ball for Christmas. They still have those, believe it or not. My daughter loves it. Asking every question of the son, like I used to when I was 8 years old. Look, here's I mentioned earlier the demand side. So I don't really see these things changing unless there's some catastrophic event. And I don't know if I want them to change. So number one, the millennials now are in the years where they're getting the housing market. And this is the biggest generation in Canada's history. And the problem is their incomes have not caught up with housing prices. So they're like generation, screwed right now. We always need to fight for them. So millennials are coming to the market. Number two, there is the bank of mom and dad. So if you come from a family that, owns a home or saved up a lot of money, and the boomers will retire as the wealthiest generation in Canada's history. They love their daughters and sons dearly, right? They just love them, but they wouldn't mind seeing them move out of the basement and get a place of their own. So that's there. Mortgage rates, while they've gone up a little bit, are still low compared to what we've seen in our lifetimes. And Canada is really a beacon, particularly Ontario, for talent from around the world and across our country. People want to live here, right? So all those things are contributing to demand, and I don't see those things changing. And I hope that they don't, because those are good things about our country and our province. But where we need to focus on the supply side. So the language you used was a big correction. I think what we need to do is increase housing supply, particularly at that first time level, so people can find a place they can afford rather than trying to knock everybody else's house price down. I think demand's going to remain strong. So what do you do when you remember from your economics 20? Well, you need to increase supply to help get affordability closer to home.
Absolutely, Tim. Thank you. Can we go through that? We hear so many, like you said, it's such an issue for a political issue right now, right? We're hearing from different levels of government promising different things. Can we go through a couple of them? I mean, a lot of people are hearing about the measures against foreign home buyers. The federal budget included, I think the federal budget has a 2-year ban on foreign home buyers, and the Ford government increased the foreign buyer tax by 5%. Is that going to do a thing to deal with housing prices?
Look, anytime if we see, foreign speculators driving up the market, and I'll talk about one particular area in a moment, we're concerned about that. We want to see it stop. When we look at our numbers, though, we're not seeing that as a driving factor. Foreign purchases tend to be 2% or less of the marketplace, and that has not gone up in the last number of years. And, having spent 21 years in the political arena, I get the popularity, but it's not going to make a difference on prices. Only supply will. There is one area, though, I think we can really close in that realm. And we have an issue with money coming and snapping up real estate from overseas, and they hide behind numbered companies. So we really don't know who that is necessarily. And the threat here is this could be money coming from drug lords, corrupt foreign officials that see Canada as a safe haven to hide their money, to launder it into Canada. The US, UK, the European countries have all put up walls. We still allow them to hide behind anonymous names and business numbers. So we think that should be cleaned up, make it fully searchable. We can tell if there's more money hiding there. And that helps authorities back in, some other country track illegal money back to the scene of the crime. And that can help shut that down.
You talk about the politics behind it too, right? And some of these measures are meant to get headlines, right? I mean, sometimes the politicians want to make it seem like they're doing something. They're trying to do something, but they're making it's more about the headline than the actual policy. Is that the same with the blind bidding rules that everyone's talking about the last couple of days? I mean, there's the Ford government brought in some new rules that allow sellers to get rid of blind bidding if they want. Is that going to make a difference? Is that going to make a dent?
I think it's going to be helpful to give people another option. So basically what the Ford government announced was that there would be a new type of offer process away from the traditional offer process where privacy rules prohibit realtors from sharing the contents of an offer, including the price. So the Ford government said, okay, well, if everybody opts into that process, you can have a new, more transparent model. And what we had suggested something like this. We like this because it's still respecting your right to privacy. Not everybody wants to tell a bunch of strangers how much they're going to put down, how much the deposit is. Do they have to sell their house? Where is their house? Right? That's pretty sensitive information, and not everybody wants to say that with strangers. And ultimately, it's your home. It's not like it's owned by the government or it's vacant. Somebody's counting on the returns from that home to maybe finance a retirement with some dignity, or maybe because there's kids and they want to get a bigger house. So we just believe fundamentally that homeowner should be in the driver's seat on how she sells her home. It's up to them. But I like the option of a new choice. To finish off on this, will it lead to a change in prices? Probably not. There are some jurisdictions like Australia, New Zealand that have open offers. And basically everybody knows what everybody else has on for the price. And they've actually had a higher increase in rates than we have had in Canada because auction fever develops. So it's good for transparency, but is it a measure to actually bring affordability within the reach of the average Ontarian? It won't. Only supply can do that.
Yeah. I think you flicked at it earlier, Tim, about I wonder, and this might be too much of a wide-ranging question, but are municipalities have to be more open to certain developments? Is that part of the issue at play here? I mean, we often see whenever there's a new development, a high-density development, it's often stuck in the process for a long time. Is that part of the problem here?
Totally. The real big villain that is squeezing out, that millennial couple that are expecting and can't get into the market, or a new Canadian or somebody who comes from modest background, an entrepreneur, and saved up every buck and they still can't afford a home, is really the red tape, the runaround, the excessive fees and costs, and NIMBYism that drives projects away. I had the opportunity to sit on the province's housing affordability task force. We heard a lot about the not in my backyard, the NIMBY syndrome, and how local councillors respond to that and squeeze out new residents or keep kids stuck at home who want to get a house of their own. In fact, it's gone so far, there's a new acronym called BANANA. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. Still got my hand. We need to take that on.
Did you make that one up?
No, we actually heard it when we were doing our consultations. But you identified what is one of the main obstacles. I'll give you some examples. Some municipalities in the GTA, before you even put a spade in the ground to start a new home, you're looking at $150,000 of fees. Wow. Other municipalities that take years to approve a simple development, in some subdivisions 10 years. Mm-hmm. Well, with housing inflation, that means that project is going to be out of the reach of an average middle class Canadian, right? So we need to take these things on, and we're hearing positive things from some of the political parties on that. So I do have hope in this provincial election campaign we'll see some real solutions to go after the cause of the problem and not the symptoms of the problem.
Tim, just to follow up to my earlier question on market correction, is it safe to say it's in the interest as a real estate association to see prices come under control?
So there will be, if you talk to individual members in the areas that you cover, they'll probably say that they wish there was a bit more constrained pace right now because they want to do the best they can for their clients. And the current frenzy that we've seen makes a realtor feel pretty bad when they can't help them get into a house, or the frustration of going through so many and making decisions, like that in a fast moving marketplace. I've really enjoyed my time with AREA over the years, because when you ask a realtor to talk about when they helped a first-time buyer get their home and the smile they get on their face, like, it's a really engaging story. They want nothing more to help create those homeowners. But if the market were at a position where they had a bit more time to do so, less of the frenzy we've seen, I think a lot of realtors would be quite happy with that and feel they could do their best job serving their clients, both buyers and sellers. We are seeing, after you mentioned earlier, the significant increase in prices, we are currently seeing in Ontario a bit of a tempering in the marketplace. We'll see how long that lasts, but some of the increases we saw last year and the year before that do not look like they're in the spring market in 2022.
Is there anything else, Tim, that we didn't ask you that that Ontarians need to understand, that people in our markets need to understand?
I always want to be on guard about new taxes on housing. You mentioned the foreign buyers tax. I appreciate you bringing that up, but some governments are also considering new homeowner taxes, and they float these ideas. And that would be a major betrayal of the promise that has been made by successive governments of every stripe to Canadians, that if you saved up money in your home and you sold it for your retirement, you wouldn't get whacked with a new capital gains tax. And I'm just seeing, after government spend during COVID, and they had to, I'm hearing a little bit too much talk about reconsidering that. Or maybe if you want to have a nice cottage around Sault Ste. Marie, or in Simcoe County or the Lakelands, that, well, we're going to nail you with a brand new tax. Homes are taxed enough. I mean, think of another product that you buy and you pay a lot of taxes, and then you pay taxes on it every year after that.
Right.
So I do worry about that. And as we hit the election trail, I would encourage people to talk to their politicians or candidates to say, tell me you're not going to put a new tax on my home. I do worry about that.
Sure. Speaking of the election trail, Tim, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you, but you were the Conservative leader for many years. Any possibility we could see you back in politics one day?
Thanks for asking. I like to say I spent 21 years with that sentence in public life. That's more than they give you for manslaughter in the province of Ontario. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I have a lot of respect for folks who put their name forward for public life, because they're fighting to make their community better, an idea they believe in. But at some point in time, not to compare myself to an NHL, I wish for that, but I was nowhere out of house league. It's time to skate off the ice and do other things. And I really enjoy what I'm doing and fighting for more homeowners in the province. I enjoyed my time in the ice, but it was time to retire. But thank you for asking.
I can certainly relate to the house league analogy. Tim Hudak, the Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Real Estate Association. Thanks for doing this today, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you for your time, and keep up the great work of the village.
Coming up next, we'll be joined by a city councillor from Cambridge who has a very interesting idea on how to get voters to the polls. That's next on Inside the Village.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
We're pleased to be joined now by Scott Hamilton, a city councillor in Cambridge, Ontario, with a very interesting idea about getting voters to the polls. Scott, good of you to join us today on Inside the Village. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think I'd like to start, Scott, if we can, by telling us about your election, which may have been one of the longest in history.
Yeah, so I was actually elected during the pandemic in a by-election in Ward 7 in Cambridge, where unfortunately the previous councillor passed away. They needed to fill the role. They opted for an election, and it was actually postponed about 3 days before we were supposed to go to the polls in late March. So that extended the election another a good 7 months. So we had to end up campaigning in the end during the pandemic. Sorry. So it was a long campaign, to say the least.
So how did that finally end?
Well, luckily I won.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was weird, right? Because how do you, especially when there's so much uncertainty around COVID and how it was transmitted and what the social costs are going to be, how do you knock on doors? How do you distribute flyers and packages when people are afraid to touch things? So it really changed the dynamics, and we had to be extremely careful. Not to make anyone ill and not to make anyone feel uncomfortable.
Sure. So was it early 2021 that you were finally elected, or when was that?
It was actually October 2020.
Yeah. Hard to put years together with all the time.
It sure is.
Yeah, I'm old enough now. I forget how old I am. I'm
For sure.
Scott, it only gets worse, just so you know.
Sure.
Oh, good to know.
Scott, can you tell us about your proposal here? We've read about it in Cambridge today. Our reporter, Joe McGinty's been on it, but what is your proposal?
So my proposal, and it comes from knocking on a lot of doors around Cambridge and a lot of different types of households, is to ask the region of Waterloo to provide free transportation on election days. If not the entire Grand River transportation system, then at least those routes that are on polling stations. Because there are actually a lot of residents out there that have trouble accessing polls. There might be a physical barrier, there might be a financial barrier, there might be a transportation barrier, there's just no cars, no rides. And there are people out there that just don't feel comfortable calling a candidate for a ride because they essentially see it as selling their vote to a candidate to get to the polls. There are people that are uncomfortable with that, and I understand that. I think it should be free to access the polls to vote on election day as our democratic right.
And Scott, you're not talking just municipal. This would be provincial and federal as well.
Preferably, that's what I'm asking the region to look into. In a dream world, if it's an election, be it municipal and the school board, provincial, federal, I think you should be able to access the polls free of charge. And I think that'll increase turnout and also acceptance of the political process and the system generally, because I think a lot of people have really lost faith in that.
Do you know of other cities that do this, Scott?
Yeah, actually. So I know BC has a number of cities that have kind of toyed around with it. Like I know Victoria, for example. Regina, I believe, has done it. Lethbridge, Alberta, Edmonton was looking into it. I'm not sure whether or not they went forward with it. And there are a number of American cities as well, like LA, Dallas, Charlotte. We do see it kind of peppered around North America. But in Ontario, I don't believe there are any cities that have actually done this so far. So I think it'd be a very great opportunity for Cambridge and Waterloo region to hopefully take the lead in something that breaks down barriers for residents to vote.
It does sound fascinating. I'm interested in how it would work. Like, would your voter card work as a bus pass that day?
That's a great question. I think some cities have done that. They've just said if you bring your voter card, if you bring proof of ID, I think it might have been Victoria, said if you're a youth or you're a student and you bring your student card, then you're allowed to access the polls for free. And I think some cities have just said it's kind of like New Year's Eve, right? Where it's like you get on the bus, it's free because we want you to get there safely. The whole system is free. So that's one of the reasons I want the region to look into it is what would work best. And importantly, how do you market it to people? Because there's no sense in rushing this through, having no one know about it or know how to use it. And then you just end up creating a free day of transportation that no one uses. And there's a cost to the taxpayer with a very little increase, if at all, in voter turnout. So that's not what I want, not what I'm asking for. I think it's a measure twice, cut once type of scenario. But if it's done properly, I really think it would be a huge boost to the democratic process and making sure people have their voice heard a lot more than they have in the past, I think, with declining voter rates.
Yeah, Scott, it's a good point that you bring up on the financial end. Obviously, there may not be a true hard cost to it, but certainly a lost revenue angle to it. So how do you address that, and how do you make up for that?
That's a good question. I mean, the first is, it's a cheesy saying, but it's true. Democracy isn't free. Freedom isn't free. There's always a cost, right? And so right now we're paying staff to occupy the polls. We're paying to have them open. We pay for the materials. So I think it makes sense that we should at least make sure that people can get there. I don't think the cost would be massive. We already see lots of municipalities that have free transportation on days like New Year's, so people can access the polls. One thing I'm hoping is that it would be a boost to public transportation as well, where it might actually inspire people that don't usually take the bus, or in our case, in Waterloo region, the LRT, to actually get on it and use it, and maybe use it more. So you might actually increase user fares by people using public transportation more, which I certainly hope would be an effect of it. Yeah, you also see less people on the roads. So there might be a small marginal cost of fewer accidents. There's the environmental cost as well. If you get more people using public transportation, less cars on the road, you get less pollution. So I think you would see those benefits. And of course, the greatest benefit is it'd be a small, you could say, investment from the taxpayer to get a larger benefit back, which is, I think, greater trust in the electoral system. If you do get more people to the polls, I think that does kind of send a message to the electorate and the population generally that, okay, this is legit. It's enough of us have voted where we can place trust in our elected officials rather than what we're seeing today, which is a declining voter rate and an increasing voter apathy, which is really unfortunate.
Can you talk about that, Scott? What are the numbers? What has the voter turnout been like in Cambridge the last couple of elections?
Fairly low, I think, compared to the other areas of Waterloo region. I know for the by-election, because it was during the pandemic, and a municipal by-election in a city doesn't quite garner the media attention as as a federal election, let's say. So I think that the turnout was fairly low. It was about 29%.
Okay.
Right. Which is, granted, it was during COVID. So I understand if someone wanted to stay home or they're hesitant to vote, it's understandable. But that's definitely something we can pick up on. And during normal elections, it obviously goes up to about 50, 60%. But we're still seeing in Waterloo region the same consistent decline that we're seeing, I think, nationally. Mm-hmm. Occasionally you get the boosts, right? If you have like Trudeau mania goes in, people get excited to vote. You do see that slight kind of boost in the polls. But overall, we see like a declining sine wave. Because I think people are just becoming slightly more apathetic and discouraged with the political system, and people in elected office. And that's really one of the things I'm hoping this motion inspires. It isn't just saying, hey, we're going to get you to the polls for free. It's saying, we want you to vote. We want you to talk about this. We want you to look at the candidates. We want you to travel with your family and actually get re-inspired to engage this system, because you may have been turned off in the past. But I want to do everything I can as a part-time elected official. City council's part-time, but to show people, no, we want you to participate. So please, if you can get to the polls, go for it. We'll give you every opportunity to do so.
Yeah, it's definitely an important issue. We want to have voter turnout as high as we can in all our elections. It's been a discussion point from every election I can remember. I guess some people listening to this may just wonder, though, is transit really the problem here, or is it just that people are too apathetic to go and vote? I mean, what are you hearing from people you talk to when you talk about knocking on doors? Are you actually hearing from people saying, I would come vote, but I just can't get there?
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's a mix of both. It's kind of two questions there, right? Mm-hmm. And the first question is, it's a mix of both. You'll always have people that are so discouraged with the political system. They'll just say, politicians are all crooks. The system is rigged. I'm not going to touch it. And so this, in one sense, it's a small drop in the pond. It's not a magical silver bullet that's going to increase voter turnout, but it will actually increase some. And I have met some people that have said, yes, I have trouble getting to the polls. I work at odd times. I don't have a ride. That money and that time can really be a significant amount, especially to those individuals in our community that are of lower income, or they're racialized, or they're marginalized in some ways. There are a lot of populations that just can't access the polls anytime or any way, like a lot of us can. We're fortunate to be able to do so. But I think it's incumbent on us as citizens, as elected officials, to ensure that everyone can get to the polls safely, effectively, just to exercise that democratic right.
Scott, maybe you can just walk us through the process. So you propose the motion, table the motion. What are the next steps? What does that process look like, and what's the timeline?
Sure. So this is something I've been batting back and forth with the clerk and people in council for a little while. Typically in councils, so I won't go through the whole spiel of how it works, but you write up a notice of motion that gets put in a council package. And so I wrote the notice of motion, I read it. This will go to Cambridge City Council on May 17th, where it'll be debated, discussed. We might have delegations for and against. And if it passes, then it will go to the region of Waterloo. We'll write a letter with them, and hopefully they'll become engaged, and other cities and municipalities around the region, like Kitchener and Waterloo, will hopefully also get on board, and we'll start that longer discussion to hopefully get something in place. Probably not for the next elections. That's a bit too quick, but hopefully sometime down the line, we'll see this.
And what's the reaction been over the last couple of days, Scott? I mean, people have been reading about this on Cambridge Today, for example. What are constituents saying to you about it?
Overall, I've gotten a lot of positive emails. People saying, hey, this is really going to help people. It's going to increase attention to vote. It will help. But you always have, as a great philosopher once said, haters going to hate. And you do get people that just hate what you do no matter what. And even though I've been working on this for a while, it's just electioneering, or you're just out to get votes, or you're just out for a photo op. And I've only been in my position for 2 years. It was a by-election. So every single thing I do is close to the next election. But it happens with every single thing you do. And to me, it's just a testament to that apathy and that anger that exists out there in the electorate. And so my mentality is just keep trying to do good things to help people, regardless of what people say, regardless of the naysayers. And hopefully it takes effect, and we can help people out there that otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to get to the polls to have their voice heard.
Well, it certainly sounds like a very interesting initiative, Scott, and we wish you all the best of luck with it. Scott Hamilton, City Councillor from the City of Cambridge. Scott, thanks for joining us today on Inside the Village.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
He was great, and the one thing that he said that makes a lot of sense, haters are going to hate, and our next story really speaks to that point.
Oh, it's the perfect segue. From that to the next piece we're going to talk about is how the city of Greater Sudbury has banned all Facebook comments because they just can't keep up with the hate that's on there.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. And it's coming up next on Inside the Village.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Alongside Frisco, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Welcome back to Inside the Village. We told you moments ago about a situation surrounding the Facebook page of the City of Greater Sudbury. Here to talk about that and more, we're pleased to be joined by the Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Greater Sudbury, Ed Archer. Ed, welcome to Inside the Village.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
You've had an interesting situation in the City of Greater Sudbury where your Facebook page is concerned in relation to the deletion of comments. And I understand that you posted a message that kind of highlighted why you were doing it, experiencing increasing threats, bullying, harassment, inappropriate comments aimed at staff, that kind of thing. I guess the obvious first question, Ed, would be why did you guys make that decision to eliminate comments?
Well, thanks for the question. I think the plain, straightforward answer is it's not helpful to facilitate the kind of dialogue we expect our Facebook channel to support us in delivering services to the community with. So when we deal with those types of comments, it's hurtful not just to the staff who read them and monitor the dialogue on that channel. It's also hurtful to the other residents who are interested in engaging and learning about the services that they rely on every day in some form or another. As a community, well, as a municipality and as any municipality generally, we're in so many lines of business. There's really no way you can go through a day without feeling the effects of the municipal services that are there to support your lifestyle. So there's a lot of engaged people. We've got over 21,000 followers on our Facebook channel. So seeing the negativity, seeing the disinformation, seeing the kind of language that we're seeing there doesn't build trust and confidence. It doesn't facilitate advancing dialogue with the community about change initiatives that we may have underway or creating the kinds of opportunities for feedback that we're really interested in hearing about from our residents.
I appreciate that answer, Ed. Can you give us an example? What are kind of the ones what kind of stuff are you receiving? What are the ones that are seared in your memory here? What kind of examples?
Well, thankfully, we have a great communications staff, and those are the folks who are seeing every one of those comments that they monitor and remove when there's some inappropriate language, there's some inappropriate information or threatening information or threatening language, that puts them in a position of monitoring a discussion that we're hoping is net positive for the community and informs rather than distracts with this kind of unhelpful contribution. And so those examples that stick in my mind are the ones that staff share with me in the context of, well, this was a really bad one. And it often involves language that you wouldn't use in a face-to-face discussion, certainly not in a public setting. It involves derogatory comments against elected officials, against public officials. It involves misinformation. It involves one person's perspective about data, and often this has come through particularly strongly in our conversations with the community about the COVID-19 support that the city's been providing in collaboration with our public health staff, and so a lot of disinformation about the effects of vaccinations or the potential implications for those who choose not to be vaccinated, and creating a really distracting dialogue that is ultimately unhelpful. So those examples are the ones that stand out, but all of them have a way of eroding the capacity of the staff to respond effectively to those interested citizens And it detracts from those citizens who are interested in visiting our page to learn more about our services to actually want to do so, because it's just mentally taxing in an unhelpful way.
What kind of toll does that take on your staff? I mean, people literally would have been watching these comments all the time. What's the toll that takes on them?
Well, it saps their energy. It does cause stress. It increases anxiety. And thankfully, we've developed an approach, thankfully, I say, because it's helpful for those individuals. But it's unfortunate we had to, where we've rotated our communication staff through the process of monitoring these comments so that no one individual is unduly burdened with the feedback and the after effects of having read so much negativity. And let me say that's not to suggest that all of the comments on our Facebook page are of this negative, unhelpful nature. But I imagine that you've been part of online forums where one or two negative voices really does distract from the positive impacts that the others on the channel would contribute. And so it's in that context where we would see less interest from the community in the information posted there. It would have the effect for our staff of creating a lower level of productivity, some absenteeism as a result of the mental health breaks that they might need and the stress that they're feeling, and overall doesn't contribute positively to the outcomes that we're trying to produce.
And have you taken the lead from other cities or municipalities, or are you guys blazing a trail here?
Well, we're not first, and this isn't a wave of communities that are making a choice to disable these comments like we have. There are some other Canadian examples of cities that have disallowed comments on their Facebook page. We chose to do this, though, because it felt to me like the right thing to do. And it's in the interest of protecting our staff's mental health. It's in the interest of supporting a positive dialogue with the community. And when I talked to our director of communications about the potential for this choice, the reality is there's a lot of other ways people who disagree with our approach to delivering service or with the choices about how the services that we're providing look to them are affecting their lives to express those views. And so with those other channels in place, we have an engagement platform called Over to You, where people can register and express their views. We have opportunities to attend public meetings. We have opportunities for residents to contact our 311 service, which is the general number that anyone with any service request can use to make a call into the city, and online platforms that facilitate that same kind of access. So there were plenty of ways for people who didn't agree with our approach to business to make their views known without this channel. And those other channels, we're seeing far less negativity and aggressive or inappropriate language than what we're seeing here. So in that context, it just felt like the right choice. And so far, the feedback from those who have expressed an opinion about that choice has been generally positive.
How much of this is due to the pandemic, do you think, Ed? Has things really gotten worse since COVID-19 hit?
We noticed a lot more of this type of commenting as a consequence of our COVID-19 posts. So we've collaborated quite extensively with our public health staff to facilitate vaccination clinics, to create messaging about, amplify messaging as well, about the social controls that have been applied through provincial directions and through public health guidance. And in the context of the organization's approach to managing COVID-19 protocols for its own employees, we've established a vaccine mandate and an expectation that if you're an employee of the City of Greater Sudbury, you're fully vaccinated, and you will be, not just to protect your colleagues at work, but also to protect those who come to one of our public buildings to do business with us. And so from those messages, we would see a lot more of these negative comments than we've seen previously, although they've always been there in some form. But those negative COVID-19 reactions have spilled over more often into other messages about our other municipal services. So certainly over the last couple of years, it's been an increasingly problematic issue for us.
Yeah, I think you're certainly not alone in seeing that, I'm sure. We have a very talented City Hall reporter there in Sudbury, Tyler Clark, who does a great job covering local politics, the local politics beat there. When you asked him about this decision, or when he asked you about this decision to shut down comments, you said to him, quote, "I would respectfully suggest to the people making the comments that they would probably be better served getting some counseling rather than using their time making such comments on our Facebook page." I mean, what kind of people do you think are making these comments?
Well, I respect the fact that they're feeling confident enough in their views to make them heard. And in that context, then I'd suggest they take it a step further and find a constructive way of engaging those decision makers who can address their concerns, because we get lost in the emotion and we can't get to the core issues when we're dealing with somebody who's threatening, the jobs of those who are there to serve, or threatening the perception that they want to provide of being a trustworthy source by suggesting that there's misinformation or disinformation being promoted, and we need to get past that. And so, those folks who have the inclination to express those opinions would go a lot farther, I think, with their efforts if they took a little more time and thought about how to constructively engage, rather than spend the time trying to tear down those people who have put themselves in a position of leadership and or who are part of an organization whose only purpose is to serve the community. And what that service looks like is decided by an elected member of council in collaboration with 12 others who have gone through quite a rigorous process of being selected by residents themselves to represent them. And so in all of that, I'd say those folks who still feel like they know what the right answer is and who've forcefully expressed those views with a lot of emotion would go a lot farther if they would step back a little bit, think about that context, and then consider how best to present that alternate perspective. And in some cases, it may not get the instant reaction that they're looking for. Nevertheless, they're not as effective as they think they are, except to the extent that they may feel some personal release from having the opportunity to sit behind a keyboard and make these rather inflammatory comments available for others to see.
And I guess the flip side to this would be, how do you respond to residents who say, "Hang on, wait a second, how do I voice my opinion to the city now? Is this kind of a muzzling of free speech? How do you answer that?"
Thank you. Yeah, we thought about that as well. And I think because we have other channels available for residents who want to express their views that don't attract the kind of negativity that our Facebook page has attracted for some reason, that there are plenty of ways for those alternate perspectives to be shared. There's no one stifling any voices here. In fact, we're probably among the most transparent and accessible organizations that you do business with in whatever form.
Ed, last question for you today. I think you mentioned around 21,000 followers on Facebook. Are you worried about losing any of those, or do you even care at this point?
Well, the objective is to share information and to engage the community in a way that builds trust and confidence. And so I think if the consequence of putting this choice on the table is that some people don't want to engage with us through our Facebook page anymore, that's fine. There are other ways they can engage with us if they want to. And at the end of the day, if some of those who no longer follow us are those who are making these kinds of comments, I'm personally okay with that.
Ed Archer, the CAO of the City of Greater Sudbury. Ed, good luck. Thanks for doing this today.
Thanks very much. I appreciate your interest. Take care.
Really good show this week, Frisco. I think the story that resonated the most for me was Tim Hudak and his comments on the housing market and what we're going through in the province of Ontario. And I guess it's almost safe to say you could call it a crisis. We're in uncharted waters. And I can't wait to see where it goes and what we're talking about 6 months from now.
Well, we're definitely going to hear about a lot with the provincial election campaign coming up. It's definitely going to be, I would say, one of the top 3 issues. One of the places we know we won't be reading about it is the comment section of the City of Sudbury's Facebook page.
Well played. You are absolutely correct there, sir. And that's a wrap on another episode of Inside the Village. Don't forget, you can check it out each and every week across the Village Media Network. You can also get it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And now, go to insidethevillage.ca. Thanks for joining us. For Frisco, Michael Friscolanti, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.